At 4:17 in the morning, a man stood alone in a warehouse the size of 40 football fields, watching a single red light blink on a dashboard that tracked in real time every dollar spent on Earth inside his stores. 300,000 employees, $200 billion in annual revenue. A logo so recognizable that children could draw it before they could spell their own last name. He owned all of it, and he still couldn't sleep. 41 years earlier, that same man had been sitting on a folding chair in a repossessed van, counting $17.80, wondering if he would eat that week. His name was Marcus Kane. And before he became the most feared man in retail, before governments opened investigations into his company, before small-town mayors wept on camera as their main streets emptied out, before economists coined a term just to describe the damage he could do to a local economy, he was a failed toy salesman who couldn't sell toys. This is the story of how obsession, desperation, and a single ruthless idea built an empire so large it reshaped how an entire planet shops. And it's the story of what that empire cost, the towns it swallowed, the competitors it buried, and the man at the center who never once looked back. Kane didn't start with a vision. He started with failure, the kind that follows a man from town to town like a shadow he can't outrun. In his 20s, he took a job hawking wind-up toys door to door across the Midwest. A job with no salary, only commission, in an era when families were counting pennies and toys were the first thing cut from the budget. He was good with people. He was terrible at closing. Month after month, he watched other salesmen hit their quotas while he came home with sample cases full of unsold merchandise and a growing pile of unpaid bills. By 26, he had declared bankruptcy, not once, but twice. His first wife left. His name was quietly circulated among suppliers as a credit risk not worth the paperwork. Anyone watching from the outside would have written him off entirely. Some who knew him did exactly that. But somewhere in that humiliation, Kane noticed something nobody else was paying attention to. The big department stores of the era were fat, slow, and arrogant. They marked up merchandise as much as the market would bear, assuming customers had nowhere else to go. Kane started asking a question that seems obvious now, but was radical then. What if someone sold the exact same goods for less and made it up entirely on volume? It sounds simple. It nearly destroyed him twice more before it worked even once. He rented a single storefront in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, using a loan co-signed by a cousin who would later regret it. He stocked the shelves with closeout merchandise, bought for pennies on the dollar from manufacturers desperate to offload it. He slashed his own margins to nearly nothing. His accountant told him, in writing, that the math didn't work. For 18 months, it didn't. He slept in the stockroom to save on rent. His second wife, the one who stayed, later said he lost so much weight during that stretch that his wedding ring fell off his finger while he was stacking shelves at midnight, and he didn't notice for 3 days. Here's the detail almost nobody knows. The turning point wasn't a stroke of genius. It was a spreadsheet. Late one night, staring at ledgers by the light of a single bulb, Kane realized his competitors weren't just charging more. They were structurally incapable of charging less. Their supply chains ran through 4 separate layers of middlemen, each one taking a cut. Kane started calling manufacturers directly. He cut every layer he could reach. It was unglamorous, it was tedious, and it worked. Within 3 years, that single storefront had become 5. Within 8 years, it had become 63, stretching across state lines, always chasing the same brutal formula. Buy in volume nobody else could match, sell at margins nobody else could survive, and let the competition either match his prices and go broke, or hold their prices and watch their customers walk out the door. Here's the open loop worth holding on to. Somewhere in this expansion, one of Kane's earliest employees quietly warned him that the strategy that built his empire would one day be used to destroy it from the inside. Kane laughed it off. That warning would resurface decades later, in a way nobody in that room could have predicted. By his mid-30s, Kane wasn't just running stores anymore. He was running a machine. He built his own distribution centers before rivals believed distribution centers mattered. He was among the first in his industry to computerize inventory tracking. a decision that seemed absurdly expensive to his board and obviously brilliant in hindsight. Every efficiency he squeezed out of the system, he funneled directly into lower prices, and lower prices meant more customers, and more customers meant more leverage over suppliers, and more leverage meant even lower prices. It was a flywheel, and once it started spinning, almost nothing could slow it down. By the time Kane turned 50, his company wasn't competing with other retailers. It was erasing them. Small hardware stores that had operated for 3 generations closed within 18 months of a Kane superstore opening nearby. Family-run pharmacies, unable to match his prices on anything, watched their customer counts collapse by half in a single fiscal year. Local newspapers ran headlines with names like Ghost Town Main Street, and in more than a few cases, they weren't exaggerating. Kane expanded relentlessly, opening new locations at a pace that terrified his own board of directors. Some years, he opened a new store every 3 days. He pushed into groceries. He pushed into pharmacies. He pushed into electronics, into clothing, into anything with a barcode. Analysts started calling it category killing, a term Kane reportedly hated because he thought it made him sound like the villain in the story. He wasn't wrong about how people saw him. Protesters showed up outside store openings. City councils passed ordinances specifically designed to keep his stores out, some of which were later overturned in court, others which held. A federal investigation was opened into his labor practices. Wages so low that a portion of his full-time workforce reportedly relied on public assistance just to get by. A statistic his critics repeated at every hearing and press conference for years. Kane's answer, on the rare occasions he gave interviews, was always the same. He wasn't forcing anyone to shop at his stores. Customers came because the prices were lower, plain and simple, and nobody had ever built a business by insulting the people who kept it alive. That answer satisfied almost no one. It also happened to be true, at least in part. And that tension between genuine value for the customer and genuine devastation for the competition became the defining contradiction of his entire career. Here's where that earlier open loop finally resolves. The same relentless cost-cutting that built Kane's empire eventually turned inward. To keep prices low as growth slowed, his successors squeezed suppliers harder, squeezed labor harder, automated harder, and in doing so, quietly transformed the culture that built the company into something closer to the cold, indifferent giants Kane had originally set out to destroy. The employee who warned him decades earlier had been right. It just took 30 years to prove it. Today, Kane's company operates on nearly every continent. It employs more people than most national militaries. It moves more freight in a single week than entire countries move in a year. To a shopper looking for the lowest possible price on almost anything, it remains, by a wide margin, the most convenient option on the planet. And yet drive through the towns that stood in its path, and you'll find the same pattern again and again. Boarded storefronts, empty lots where family businesses once stood, a hollowed-out main street a quarter-mile from a Kane superstore glowing under fluorescent light at midnight. Economists still argue over the verdict. Some studies conclude that Kane's model, for all its brutality, put more real purchasing power into the pockets of working-class families than almost any retailer in history. Other studies point to the wages, the shuttered downtowns, and the quiet erosion of local ownership as a cost that never shows up on a receipt but gets paid all the same. Kane himself, in the final interview he gave before stepping back from public life, was asked whether he had any regrets. He paused for a long time.
Then he said that he built exactly what he set out to build, a place where people who didn't have much money could stretch it further. He said he never claimed to be anyone's hero. He said the only promise he ever made was a lower price, and he kept that promise every single day for 40 years.
Whether that's a legacy worth admiring or a warning worth remembering depends entirely on which side of the empire you happen to live on. The blinking red light in that warehouse is still tracking every second, every transaction, all over the world. Marcus Kane built a machine that never stops. The only question history hasn't answered yet is whether it was ever meant to.